how do we actually align our lives with God's direction? It's about moving past just asking God to bless the plans we've already made and getting into a place where we're walking in step with Him every single moment. So let's jump right in. It all starts with this really simple question that the prophet Amos asked thousands of years ago. Just think about it in a normal, everyday way. If you and a friend are leaving a coffee shop, but you're heading to the library and they think you're going to the park, well, you're not going to be walking together for very long, are you? And the thing is, this isn't just a practical problem. It's a huge spiritual principle. It is the absolute starting line for our relationship with God. Before any journey can really get going, there has to be an agreement on where we're headed and how we're going to get there. So that brings us to our first big idea, and it's that so often we get this whole thing completely backwards. We think the goal is to get God to walk with us, right? To get Him to sign off on the path we've already picked out. But what we're about to see is that real spiritual walking is about something totally different. And that's why we keep coming back to this verse from Amos. The principle here is just crystal clear. Agreement has to come before you start moving. If we want to walk with God, we first have to get on the same page about His direction. And this really shows the contrast between two different approaches. On one hand, you have our normal human tendency. We make our plans, we set our goals, and then we say, okay, God, can you please bless this for me? But God's way completely flips that on its head. First, we align our will with His, and then we start walking together. You think of Enoch in the Old Testament. It just says he walked with God. It implies this life of constant moment-by-moment agreement. So, you might be asking, how is that even possible? How can we as humans actually agree with an all-knowing God? Well, the Apostle Paul gives us the key. Through the Holy Spirit, we're given access to what he calls the mind of Christ. Now, this isn't about losing who you are, but it's about having your entire perspective shaped by His. It's this incredible gift that lets us start seeing things and people the way He does. Okay, so if we're all in on walking in agreement, the next step is learning to see the world through His eyes. So let's talk about how to start reading the signs and understanding what's really going on around us. So Amos keeps going with these really powerful, almost raw images from nature. A lion doesn't just roar for fun. A bird doesn't fall into a trap that nobody set. He's using these obvious, natural truths to point us to something much, much deeper on a spiritual level. He's totally setting us up. He's asking us to realize that when you hear a signal, when you see something happen out in the world, it's not just some random thing. There is always a reason behind it. From God's point of view, nothing is an accident. Every effect you see in the natural world has a spiritual cause. Our world rushes to find a purely physical, logical explanation for everything, but the Bible is always pointing us toward a deeper reality just behind the curtain. And this is a perfect and honestly a pretty sobering example. So, after this incredible, miraculous victory at Jericho, Israel gets completely defeated by the tiny town of Ai. It made zero military sense. But the spiritual cause? It was Achan's hidden sin. A secret spiritual problem produced a very real, very devastating natural effect. So the takeaway for us is huge. We have to train ourselves to look for the spiritual roar behind the events we see every day. Now, this might sound a little intimidating, right? Like we're supposed to be these spiritual detectives trying to solve some big mystery. But the next point Amos makes is so reassuring. God is not trying to hide things from us. He actually wants to reveal His plans. It's a partnership. This is a stunning promise. Just think about what this is really saying. Revelation before action. That is God's consistent pattern of mercy. He wants us to be insiders who get what's on His heart, not surprised outsiders who are just reacting to whatever happens. He's a good father who lets His kids in on the family plan. And you see this pattern woven all through the Bible. God didn't hide His plan for Sodom from Abraham. He warned Joseph about the famine that was coming. He revealed the enemy's entire military strategy to Elisha. And here's the best part. This pattern didn't stop. Today, God continues to reveal his heart and his plans to us through the Holy Spirit. Okay, so all of this is building up to what I think is the real aha moment of this whole thing. We're about to unlock the key that separates just observing the world from having true spiritual insight. Okay, so check this out. The Apostle Paul talks about two totally different ways of seeing the world. On the left, you've got the natural mind. It just relies on human logic. And to that way of thinking, the things of the Spirit, a prompting, a warning, it all just seems like foolishness. But the spiritual mind can actually discern these truths by, as Paul says, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. For example, the natural mind sees a tragic headline and only sees chaos. The spiritual mind sees that same tragedy, but it compares it with the spiritual truth of God's redemptive power, and it starts to look for where he might be at work. And who was the absolute master of this? Jesus, of course. He was constantly using these natural, everyday pictures to explain deep spiritual truths. He'd talk about the wind to explain the Spirit's unseen movement, or a tree and its fruit to show what's really going on in our hearts. He used a vine and its branches to explain our vital connection to him. He was always teaching us to see beyond the surface. All right, so we've talked about the what and the why, but now we get to the most important question, right? The how. How do we take these incredible principles and actually start applying them in our everyday lives? Let's get practical. Here are 4 habits we can start building. First up, immerse yourself in the Word. The Bible is our main filter. It's how we learn to recognize God's voice. Second, pause before concluding. Seriously, before you rush to the most logical explanation for something, just stop and ask, God, is there something more you're showing me here? Third, stay sensitive to the Spirit. This can be as simple as paying attention to that little nudge to call a friend, or that sudden peace you feel about a tough decision. And finally, actively practice connecting the realms. Make it a habit to look at your daily life and ask, what spiritual truth could this be showing me? And really, it all boils down to this. To walk in agreement with God means we move from a life of just constantly reacting to our circumstances to a life that's guided by His revelation. It's about seeing beyond the natural stuff, aligning every step with His direction, and really truly walking together. So here's a final thought. What's one area in your life this week where you can make a shift from reaction to a life that's guided by God's direction, His revelation?